I never imagined that a single phone call from someone I hardly knew would completely alter the direction of my life. My name is Noah Bennett. I'm 28 years old, and I run a small farm just outside Portland, Oregon. It's not the kind of farm people romanticize in movies. There are no endless golden fields stretching to the horizon, no dramatic cattle drives, and no picture-perfect sunsets every evening. Just a few greenhouses, a maintenance shed, and a delivery route that keeps local restaurants stocked with fresh produce. I grow what I can. I repair what breaks, and 3 times a week, I drive an aging truck into the city to make deliveries. It's simple work. Honest work. The kind that lets you sleep peacefully at night knowing you didn't have to step on anyone to get ahead. The morning Richard Whitmore called, I was halfway inside the irrigation system behind my largest greenhouse. The pump had been giving me trouble for weeks, and replacing it wasn't an option yet. Money was already stretched thin. When my phone started ringing, I almost ignored it. Something made me answer. "Mr. Bennett?" the man asked. His voice was polished and confident, the kind of voice that belonged to someone accustomed to getting exactly what he wanted. "This is Richard Whitmore. I believe you knew my former business partner, Thomas Hale. He sold you this property several years ago." I recognized the name immediately. Thomas had treated me fairly when we finalized the sale. We'd shared a few dinners discussing business afterward, but nothing beyond that. I hadn't spoken to anyone connected to him in years. "I need a favor," Richard said. "My daughter, Avery, has become difficult. She recently refused a marriage arrangement that would have secured her future and helped prevent serious financial problems for our family. I've decided she needs to learn what real work actually looks like. I want her to spend 3 months working with you." I slowly stood upright and wiped grease across my jeans. 3 months doing what exactly? I asked. "Whatever work needs doing. Physical labor. Responsibility. She's never worked hard a single day in her life. It's time she understood the consequences of her choices." Something about the way he said it bothered me. Not because of what he wanted, because of how he talked about her. Like she wasn't his daughter. Like she was a problem that needed fixing. The irrigation pump was still leaking. The bank had already sent me 2 warning letters about the loan on my new greenhouse. I wasn't exactly in a position to be picky. "How much?" I asked. The number he offered made me stop and think. It was enough to replace the pump, settle overdue taxes, and keep my farm breathing comfortably for several months. "I'm not running a prison," I told him firmly. "If she wants to leave, I'm not stopping her." Richard laughed softly. The sound felt cold. "She won't leave. The only alternative is returning home and marrying the man she's refusing. Trust me, she doesn't have many options." He explained the details. Avery would arrive the following afternoon. After we hung up, I stood there staring at the broken pump, feeling strangely uneasy, like I had just agreed to something far more complicated than a simple business arrangement. The next day, a black SUV rolled into the driveway shortly after 3 in the afternoon. I was stacking empty produce crates near the shed when the passenger door opened. Avery Whitmore stepped out. She was 25, tall, and carried herself with the confidence of someone who had spent her entire life surrounded by privilege. Her coat looked expensive. Her boots were spotless white, and her expression was carefully controlled. A driver wearing a dark suit removed a single suitcase from the vehicle, placed it on the gravel, and drove away without saying a word. I walked toward her while wiping my hands on a rag. "Noah Bennett," I said. "You must be Avery." For a moment she simply studied me, as if deciding whether I deserved a response. Then she gave a small nod. "My father said 3 months." Her voice sounded steady, but underneath it I caught the slightest tremble. Fear. Anger. Maybe both. "He did," I replied. "But I also told him something else. If you decide to leave, that date is right there. Nobody's keeping you here." Something changed in her eyes. A brief flash of surprise. She clearly hadn't expected that answer. "Why did you agree to this?" she asked. I decided honesty was easiest. "Because I need the money to repair my irrigation system. But I'm not desperate enough to become your father's prison guard." For several seconds she said nothing. The suitcase remained beside her feet, while the first drops of rain began landing on her shoulders. For the first time since arriving, she looked at me differently. Not like hired help. Like an actual person. I led her inside and showed her the small room behind the kitchen. It wasn't impressive. A bed. A desk. An old dresser that once belonged to my grandmother, and a window overlooking the greenhouses. No luxury, no private bathroom, no expensive decorations. She didn't complain. She simply placed her suitcase beside the bed and stared at the room as though she had landed on another planet. That evening I was organizing tools in the shed when I heard her voice outside. She stood beneath the small awning near the back door, speaking on her phone. Rain tapped steadily against the roof. Her words carried across the yard. "I'm not marrying him, Dad." I froze. Even from 20 feet away I could hear Richard's tone through the phone. Sharp. Demanding. Used to obedience. Avery stood perfectly still. One hand gripped the railing so tightly, her knuckles looked white. "If the family collapses because I won't marry Grant," she said, Then it was already falling apart long before this. Her voice cracked slightly on the last sentence. I'm not a bargaining chip. She ended the call before he could answer. For several moments she remained there, head lowered, breathing unevenly. Then she noticed me watching. She didn't seem embarrassed, only exhausted. You heard that? It wasn't really a question. Enough, I answered. To know you aren't here because you're spoiled or rebellious. She lowered her gaze toward her trembling hands. I'd rather sleep in a barn than go back and marry him. I didn't ask who Grant was. I didn't ask why her father was pushing so hard. Instead, I walked over to the storage bench beside the door and pulled out an old work jacket. It was faded, patched in several places, but still warm. I held it toward her. 6 o'clock tomorrow morning, I said. If you're staying here, you'll work like everyone else. She accepted the jacket slowly. Her cold fingers brushed mine for the briefest moment. Then she nodded, and for the first time since arriving, the anger in her eyes softened into something else. Something that looked a lot like relief. I turned and headed back toward the shed, leaving her standing there in the rain with my grandmother's jacket folded in her arms. I never looked back, but somehow I could feel her watching me, and deep down, for reasons I couldn't explain yet, I already knew this wasn't going to be the simple 3-month arrangement Richard Whitmore had promised. She started taking higher quality photos of the produce with her phone, and writing short descriptions that somehow made tomatoes, lettuce, and peppers sound premium enough to justify a higher price. When I asked why she was putting in the extra effort, she simply shrugged, because if we're going to do this, we should do it properly. I noticed she said we, and for some reason, I didn't correct her. Then Grant Caldwell arrived. It was a Thursday evening, and darkness was already beginning to settle across the farm. I was loading produce crates into the truck when an unfamiliar black luxury sedan rolled into the yard. The man who stepped out looked completely out of place. He belonged in a corporate boardroom, not standing on gravel beside a greenhouse. His coat was expensive. His shoes were polished, and the watch on his wrist probably cost more than everything I had invested in my irrigation system. He looked around the property with barely concealed disgust, as if the entire farm offended him. Avery emerged from the greenhouse still wearing work gloves and the faded jacket I'd given her. Her hair was tied back carelessly. Her cheeks were red from the heat inside. The moment she saw him, she stopped walking. Grant. Her voice was emotionless. You shouldn't be here. He smiled. But there was nothing warm about it. Your father wants you home, Avery. He's been patient long enough. I slowly set down the crate in my hands and stayed where I was. Part of me wanted to see how she handled him. Another part already suspected I wasn't going to like what happened. Grant's eyes traveled over her appearance. The dirt on her clothes, the calluses on her hands, the worn jacket, his expression twisted. So this is what you're doing now? He asked. Pretending to be poor for a few months so you can prove some kind of point? Avery removed her gloves. I noticed her hands trembling slightly. Her voice didn't. You need to leave. Grant took a step closer. Your father and I have an agreement. You're making this much harder than it needs to be. Come home, and we can all forget this little rebellion ever happened. That was when I moved. I didn't raise my voice. Didn't make a scene. I simply walked across the yard and stopped beside Avery, close enough that Grant couldn't ignore me anymore. She asked you to leave. Grant finally looked at me. For the first time, it seemed to register that I existed. Then who exactly are you? I met his stare. The man who owns the land you're standing on. He let out a short laugh. It wasn't friendly. Then he turned back toward Avery. You can keep pretending you're independent if it helps you sleep at night. Another few weeks, another month, it doesn't matter. His smile returned. Cold. Confident. People like you don't survive without their family names supporting them. Avery didn't answer. Neither did I. A few moments later, Grant climbed back into his car and drove away. The red taillights disappeared down the road. Avery remained standing exactly where she was. Silent. Watching until the car was gone. I didn't walk over. I didn't push. I simply waited. That night she sat alone at the kitchen table with a mug of tea that had long since gone cold. She hadn't taken a single sip. Maybe he's right, she said eventually. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I don't even know where I'd go if I didn't go back. I leaned against the counter and folded my arms. You're here? She looked up. Only for 3 months. That's your father's deadline, I said. Not yours. She stared at me. Really stared. As though she was hearing something she'd never heard before. The old refrigerator hummed quietly in the background. Rain tapped softly against the windows. For the first time since arriving on the farm, Avery didn't argue. She simply held my gaze, and behind her eyes, I saw something change. Something fragile. Something hopeful. I looked away before I said anything else. Before I crossed a line, I wasn't ready to cross. Because by then, I already knew the truth. Nothing about this situation was simple anymore. The end of the second month looked nothing like the beginning. Avery had changed. Not just on the surface. Something deeper. Her hands weren't soft anymore. Small scars, cuts, and calluses marked her palms. Her hair was usually pulled into a quick knot. There was almost always a streak of dirt somewhere on her cheek or forearm. The expensive coat she'd arrived in had been forgotten. Most days she wore one of my old flannel shirts she'd quietly claimed for herself. And honestly, it suited her better. She looked real. Not like the polished socialite who stepped out of that SUV 2 months earlier. Not like someone trying to meet expectations. Just herself. I noticed it most in the little things. Every morning I brewed coffee while she sat at the kitchen table reviewing orders on her laptop. Her feet tucked beneath her chair like she'd lived there for years. At lunch, we'd sit on old crates behind the greenhouse eating sandwiches. Sometimes talking, sometimes not. The silence between us had become comfortable. Easy. In the evenings, she worked on the website while I repaired whatever machine had decided to break that day. Every so often, she'd glance up, catch me watching, and smile. A small smile. Private. Unforced. Every single time, it did something strange to my chest. One night, a storm rolled through, hard enough to cut power to the greenhouse. I was halfway through checking the breaker box when the back door opened. Avery stepped outside, carrying the large flashlight from the kitchen. She was already wearing the work jacket. "Go back inside," I told her. "It's freezing." She shook her head. "You keep telling me to learn. So let me learn." I couldn't argue with that. We stood beneath the narrow overhang while rain hammered the roof above us. She held the flashlight steady while I worked through the wiring. Even when her arms started trembling from the cold, the beam never moved. Rain soaked through my shirt and dripped down my neck. She never complained. Not once. When the greenhouse lights finally flickered back to life, she released a breath of relief, like we'd just accomplished something far bigger than repairing a circuit. Later, we stood together on the porch, watching rain sweep across the darkness. The air smelled of wet soil and pine trees. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then Avery finally broke the silence. "I used to think that if I left my family, I wouldn't be anyone anymore." I looked at her. The light from the kitchen window softened the edges of her face. "And now?" She was quiet for several seconds. "Now I think I never knew who I was to begin with." The words settled heavily between us. I searched for something comforting to say. Nothing felt right, so I settled for honesty. "Then maybe this is where you figure it out." She turned toward me. We were standing closer than ever before. I could see the freckles sunlight had pulled from her skin over the last 2 months. Her eyes searched mine, and for one suspended moment, I thought about closing the distance, about kissing her. Right there beneath the porch light while rain fell around us. But I didn't. Instead, I stepped back. A small step. Just enough. "You should go inside," I said quietly. "You're freezing." Something crossed her face. Maybe disappointment. Maybe understanding. Maybe both. She didn't argue. She simply nodded and walked back into the house, leaving me alone on the porch with rain dripping from my hair and a feeling in my chest I wasn't ready to name. A few days later, we were driving back from a delivery in Portland. Rain streaked across the windshield. The city lights blurred in the distance. Avery had barely spoken during the entire trip. Then, suddenly, she said my name. "Noah." I kept my eyes on the road. "Yeah?" "Ah." She looked out the window. "I don't like you because you're an escape from my family." I stayed silent, waiting. "I like you because when I'm with you, I don't have to perform." Her voice was calm, steady. "I don't have to be the perfect Whitmore daughter." She swallowed. "I don't have to be the bargaining chip that's supposed to save a company." Her eyes dropped. "And I don't have to pretend I'm okay." I pulled the truck onto the shoulder and put it in park. Rain hammered the roof. I turned toward her. "Are you sure you want to say this right now?" She nodded immediately. "I've thought about it for weeks." I released a slow breath. "I like you too, Avery." The words came easier than expected. "But I don't want you choosing me just because I'm the first person who's treated you decently in a long time." Her eyes met mine, bright even in the darkness. "Then don't make that decision for me." The words landed hard. "I've had enough people doing that already." She was right. I thought I was protecting her. But sometimes protection looked a lot like control. I reached across the console and took her hand. Her fingers were cold. They wrapped around mine instantly. Neither of us moved closer. Neither of us kissed. We simply sat there listening to the rain, letting the truth exist between us, not rushing it, not forcing it, just accepting it. And after that night, everything changed. I stopped pretending she was only a temporary worker. She stopped pretending she didn't watch me when she thought I wasn't paying attention. Then Richard called. It happened on a Sunday morning. Avery had just finished making pancakes, a habit she'd developed because she insisted the kitchen smelled less like motor oil when she cooked instead of me. Her phone rang. The moment she saw the screen, she froze. Then she answered. Even from across the room, I could hear the sharp edge in Richard's voice. 3 months were almost over. There was a major family gathering in Seattle the following weekend. Grant would be there. According to Richard, this was her final opportunity to fix everything. If she refused to return, he would cut off support for her mother. The company would fall apart. Creditors would take control. Everything they'd built would collapse. When the call ended, Avery slowly lowered the phone onto the counter. Her face had gone completely pale. "He's using my mother to force me." I didn't ask what she planned to do. I waited. After a long silence, she looked at me. "I want to stop running." Her voice cracked slightly. "But I don't know if I'm strong enough to face him." "Then I'll come with you." She shook her head immediately. "No. If you show up, he'll blame you for everything." She looked away. "He'll make you the reason I changed instead of listening to what I'm actually saying." I hated the idea of her facing that room alone. But I respected her too much to take that choice away from her. The next morning, she packed a small bag. And before getting into the car waiting to take her away, she left a folded note on the kitchen table. I unfolded the note after she had already left. Only one sentence was written inside. "Don't let anyone convince you that my silence means I agreed." I stood alone in the kitchen, staring at those words. The house felt different. Bigger, colder, emptier. She had only been there for 2.5 months, yet, somehow, every room already felt wrong without her. Carefully, I folded the note and slipped it into my wallet. Whatever happened in Seattle, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. If Avery needed me, she wouldn't face it alone. Not while I had any choice in the matter. The hotel ballroom in Seattle couldn't have been more different from the farm. Crystal chandeliers hung overhead. Marble floors reflected the light. Expensive conversations drifted through the room like background music. I'd never been anywhere remotely like it. My boots still carried traces of Oregon dirt. My plain white shirt felt painfully ordinary beneath the glittering lights. But none of that mattered once I saw her. Avery stood near the center of the room, wearing a deep blue gown that probably cost more than my truck. Her hair was flawless. Her makeup perfect. She looked exactly like the woman who had stepped out of that SUV months earlier. Elegant, distant, untouchable. But I knew better. I could see the tension hidden beneath the surface, the stiffness in her shoulders. The way her fingers repeatedly brushed against her dress as though searching for something steady to hold on to. Richard Whitmore stood nearby, introducing her to guests. His smile looked effortless. "My daughter has spent the last few months gaining some perspective," he announced proudly. "A little time away from the city has done wonders for her maturity." Grant Caldwell stood beside her. One hand rested casually against her lower back. Like he already believed he owned the right. Avery didn't pull away. But her jaw tightened. 3 hours earlier, she'd sent me a text. Only 4 words. "I need you." I got in the truck immediately. Drove through the night without stopping. Now I stood near the back of the ballroom, partially hidden behind a pillar. I wasn't there to rescue her. I wasn't there to fight. I was there because she'd asked. The rest belonged to her. Richard lifted his glass. "And now," he announced, "I have some wonderful news to share with everyone tonight." Before he could continue, Avery stepped forward. "I have something to say." The room fell silent. Richard's smile froze. His eyes sharpened instantly. Avery looked around the room, then directly at her father. "I will not be marrying Grant Caldwell." A wave of whispers moved through the crowd. Grant's hand immediately dropped away from her back. Richard's face darkened. "Avery," he said quietly, dangerously, "this isn't the time." She didn't back down. "This is exactly the time." Her voice carried clearly across the room. "I'm tired of pretending this is a choice. It never was." Grant moved closer. His expression remained controlled. His eyes didn't. "You're upset," he said. "We can discuss this privately." Avery turned toward him. "I've discussed it privately with you countless times." Her voice grew stronger. "Every single time I said no, you and my father decided I would eventually change my mind." She shook her head. "I'm done waiting for you to listen." Richard stepped directly in front of her, blocking her view of the crowd. "If you walk away from this arrangement, we lose everything." His voice rose. "The company, the properties, your mother's future." He pointed toward her. "Is that really what you want?" Avery's hands trembled. Her voice didn't. "If the only way to save this family is to trade its daughter to a man she doesn't love, then this family was already lost years ago." I saw Richard's hand twitch, as though he wanted to grab her. That was the moment I stepped away from the pillar. I didn't hurry, didn't raise my voice. I simply crossed the room. People moved aside as I approached, until I was standing near them, close enough to be seen. Richard noticed me first. His face twisted instantly. Recognition. Disgust. "You have no business being here." His voice snapped like a whip. I met his gaze calmly. "I'm not here because of any right." I nodded toward Avery. "I'm here because she asked me to be." Grant laughed bitterly. "So that's it?" He looked directly at Avery. "A farm worker convinces you you're living inside some fairy tale romance?" Avery never flinched. "No." Her answer was immediate. "He's simply the first person who never tried to decide my future for me." Richard took another step forward. His voice hardened. "If you leave with him tonight, you are no longer my daughter." The words hit the room like an explosion. Avery went completely still. The color drained from her face. For a moment I thought she might break. Right there, in front of everyone. I moved slightly closer. Close enough for support. Not close enough to influence her decision. Because this choice had to belong to her. Only her. I lowered my voice. Avery. She looked at me. Tears filled her eyes but never fell. You don't have to answer him right now, I said softly. But if you want to leave, you can. For several seconds she said nothing. Then, slowly, deliberately, she reached for my hand, and held it. I want to go, that's all she said. Together we walked toward the exit. The ballroom watched in stunned silence. Nobody applauded, nobody objected. There was only the sound of our footsteps. Footsteps crossing polished marble, and the whispers that followed behind us. When we reached the hotel lobby, she finally let go. Her shoulders started shaking. I wrapped my arms around her beneath the glow of a crystal chandelier, not caring who saw. She didn't cry loudly, just quiet, exhausted tears against my chest. I'm scared. Her voice was barely audible. I know. I rested my chin against her hair. But you did it anyway. That night we didn't return to Oregon. Instead, I found a small inn outside the city. Nothing luxurious, just quiet, clean, safe. I rented her a separate room. She needed space. Time to breathe. Around midnight, there was a knock at my door. Avery stood there wearing one of the inn's robes. Her eyes were swollen from crying. She called her mother from my room. The conversation lasted nearly an hour. I sat quietly on the edge of the bed, listening. Sometimes hearing her voice crack, sometimes hearing it grow stronger. When the call finally ended, she lowered the phone slowly, then looked at me, almost in disbelief. She cried. Her voice sounded amazed. And she told me she was proud of me. A tear slid down her cheek. For the first time in my life, I didn't try to fill the silence. Didn't try to fix anything. I simply opened my arms. She moved beside me and rested against my shoulder. We sat there quietly until dawn began creeping across the sky. The next morning she stepped outside wearing the same blue dress, now wrinkled, her hair loose and messy. She looked exhausted, and somehow lighter. I don't have a home anymore. The words came quietly. I reached for her hand. Then we'll build a new one. She looked at me. It doesn't have to start as a place. I squeezed her fingers gently. It can start as a choice. For the first time since I'd met her, Avery Whitmore looked like someone who truly believed she had permission to choose her own life. And I already knew I would follow her wherever that choice led. Avery returned to the farm on a cool Tuesday morning late in autumn. The same black car that had delivered her months earlier rolled into the yard. But this time she opened the door herself. Before the driver even had the chance. She stepped out wearing the faded flannel shirt she'd stolen from my closet weeks ago. Her hair was loose, wind-tangled. She carried only a single bag. When she saw me standing beside the greenhouse, she smiled. Not the guarded smile she'd arrived with. Not the practiced smile she wore at parties. This one was real. Tired. Relieved. She wasn't coming back as punishment anymore. She was coming back because she wanted to, because she had chosen it. Richard followed through on every threat he made. The money disappeared. Grant quietly backed away from the arrangement after Avery's public rejection made headlines in Seattle. Within days, the Whitmore family's financial troubles became public knowledge, but Avery didn't collapse. She went to work. Harder than ever. She rebuilt the wholesale ordering system from the ground up. Reached out to every restaurant we'd ever partnered with. Created greenhouse tours for families from the city. Started teaching winter gardening workshops. Within 6 months, the farm's revenue had doubled. I finally replaced the irrigation system without using a single dollar connected to Richard Whitmore. Avery refused to depend on me financially. One evening, while we cleaned the packing shed, she made that very clear. I'm not here to be supported. She looked directly at me. I want my own paycheck. My own projects. My own name attached to the things I create. I smiled, then handed her the ledger. Start tracking your hours. Our relationship grew the same way the farm did. Slowly, steadily, without unnecessary drama. Some evenings she still became quiet after reading news about her family's struggles. Sometimes she wondered aloud if she'd been selfish. I never tried to convince her otherwise. I simply sat beside her, letting her find her own answers. 1 year later, her mother came to visit. Eleanor Whitmore arrived on a warm spring afternoon, carrying a small bouquet of wildflowers she'd gathered along the driveway. She stood beside the greenhouse, watching Avery teach a group of schoolchildren about crop rotation. For a long time, she said nothing, then tears filled her eyes. Later, while sitting on the porch with glasses of lemonade, Eleanor looked at her daughter and smiled. I've never seen you look more alive. Avery laughed softly. Dad always said this place would destroy me. Eleanor shook her head. He was wrong. Avery reached across the table and squeezed her mother's hand. He was wrong about a lot of things. Richard never came. But 3 months later, a letter arrived. His handwriting covered the envelope. Avery read it once, folded it carefully, then placed it inside the bedside drawer. She didn't throw it away. She simply wasn't ready to respond. The day I proposed, autumn had returned. Golden light filled the greenhouse. Avery sat at the same wooden table where she'd redesigned our website months earlier. Seed catalogs and paperwork surrounded her. I walked over carrying a small wooden box, then placed it in front of her. She looked up curiously. "I'm not asking because you need somewhere to belong," I said. "I'm asking because you chose your own life." I took a breath. "And I want to be part of whatever comes next." She opened the box. Inside rested a simple silver ring. Nothing extravagant, just something honest, something that suited hands accustomed to work. She stared at it, then looked at me, eyes already shining. "You're sure?" I laughed softly. "I know you come with complications." Then I smiled. "But you also come with light." I squeezed her hand. "And I'm choosing both." She laughed through tears, and said yes. We were married the following October. Not in a ballroom, not beneath chandeliers, but inside the greenhouse. Strings of simple lights hung above us. Late-season tomatoes still clung to the vines. The people who mattered stood nearby. Her mother, restaurant owners who had become friends, workers who had become family. Avery wore a simple white dress. Wildflowers gathered from the property rested in her hands. As she walked toward me, I remembered everything. The girl stepping from the SUV, the fear hidden behind her anger, the night she said she'd rather sleep in a barn than marry Grant, the moment she took my hand in Seattle and walked away from the life everyone else had chosen for her. And then I understood something. Richard Whitmore had sent his daughter to the farm, believing hardship would teach her obedience. But the farm never taught Avery to lower her head. It taught her something far more valuable. It gave her a place where she could finally stand tall,